Good afternoon. Welcome to the committee meetings for May 2nd, 2016. Our first committee meeting today is Parks and Recreation, chaired by Michael Lillquist.
Thank you, Piki. Joining me on the Parks and Recreation Committee are Council members April Barker and Roxanne Murphy, who is now with us also. We have one item before us today. It's an important and interesting discussion presentation and discussion relating to the formation of Metropolitan Park District, which is an alternative way that the city might adopt for funding our parks programs going forward. Leslie Bryson or Kelly?
Yep, me. I'm just going to start. Earlier this year, we had discussed this idea that we were going forward for a Greenways 4, that we were going to look at some different priorities because of the needs that city parks have and the places where we need to still expand access. And I had raised the issue about a Metropolitan Park District. It was a discussion that was already underway with Seth and the committee that he was leading, and so I didn't bring it forward as strongly as I felt about it. Now, after we did the level of service, obviously it was on the list of things that had been recommended by the consultant. So then it was more of a public discussion. And so I was hoping that we could have this discussion about the pros and cons of each way to fund our parks. And my goals were, one, to institutionalize the importance of our parks by giving it a dedicated funding source. So not just impact fees and not just a greenway that was for projects that came forward every 6, 7, 10 years, but to actually say we love our parks. They're a wonderful asset to our community. They're a reason people come here. There's a reason that people recreate here, and they're very important to me. So, so we put together something that Leslie is going to go through with you, and I want you to. You all have this one, right? The green one? No. Not yet. You don't have that yet.
Oh, you do have it.
Okay, I just wanted to draw your attention to the top, because the top line, because what we're talking about, I believe, is doing what we need to do for our parks and changing the funding mechanism to a Greenways 4 and a Greenways Forever. So that's the way I look at this. It's going to be similar to what we do now. In fact, the operations will be similar or the same as what we're doing now, because I think that the Greenways Committee did a very good job of looking at our pro plan, our rec plan, our capital plan, and pulling things out of that plan that is what they propose to the council and the citizens. Now, there's always room for, adjustments and discussion, but I'd just like you to think of how important the parks are to our community and the difference between having to go out every so often for a levy or making a long-term commitment that our parks are not something that we want to balance our budget on. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie, and when she's done presenting, I'm happy to have answer any questions you have of me and why I feel so strongly about this.
Thank you, Kelly. Leslie Bryson, Parks and Recreation Director. And first, let me correct a typo in the memo that was in your packet. It was your April 18th meeting that you asked us to come back with additional information as a follow-up to the discussion we had at your retreat and the information that was presented at Peter Moy about metropolitan park districts, and just to provide some more information so we could have some more discussion about metropolitan park districts. It's not a new concept. They exist in the state of Washington and have since 1907. They exist all over the country, often more in the Midwest than other states. Tacoma Metropolitan Park District was the first one established right after the legislature allowed for them in 1907. They've been listed in our PRO plan as a potential source of revenue for parks funding since at least 2002. Not that we've ever undertaken it. It was in the FAST report as something the city might look at in 2008 when we were looking at ways to fund our city services. A metropolitan park districts often do and can act independent of a city government, but they can also be, through an interlocal agreement, be part of a city. The city of Seattle now has a metropolitan park district, and they are contracting with the city to provide the park services, and the Metropolitan Park District is simply a funding mechanism. They're still receiving all their general fund revenue, but this keeps them from having to go out every few years for a park improvement levy similar to our Greenway levy. The city of Olympia recently also passed a Metropolitan Park District that will supplement their general fund, not totally get rid of it. Where the boundary of the Metropolitan Park District mirrors the city boundary, then the city council can serve as the board of the district rather than having a separate elected board. It's relatively easy to set up a Metropolitan Park District, especially when we're looking at it just being the city limits and not crossing city boundaries or encompassing more than one city or part of a county. There are no special studies that are required, such as would be the case with a fire district or fire authority. We would utilize our adopted comprehensive plan and our park recreation and open space plan as our guiding document for the types of projects we're going to implement. City council would still make decisions in our budget as to what projects we're going to take forward. Setting one up is exempt from SEPA and not subject to review by the Boundary Review Board because we are just doing it within the city. The board, which in this instance would likely be the city council, would set the rate for the taxing district. The maximum amount allowed is 75 cents per $1,000 of valuation, which would generate currently approximately $7 million a year. As I pointed out in my memo, our current general fund budget is $7.6 million per year, so this doesn't create enough funding to eliminate our general fund budget, and then in addition to also do some of our capital needs. So in the chart that you were given, you can see that one possibility, if it was set at the maximum rate and generated $7 million a year, how it could vary from year to year, whether we're doing development projects, acquisition projects. We would still have enough for our capital maintenance and our general O&M, our staffing to take care of our parks, to program our parks, and to implement our projects, and not be worried about if that levy runs out, how are we going to fund that staff in the future? Because right now, that's the situation we're in. So it does provide some actual additional funding in this scenario to help take care of some of our capital maintenance needs. We have a lot of facilities that need some attention, replacement, repairs. So looking at taking care of what we have, plus being able to implement the goals and policies of our comprehensive plan to provide the level of service that our citizens have expected. We can still acquire land within the city and outside of the city. We have acquired land within our urban growth area to plan for the future. As the city annexes new areas, that new area would become part of our Metropolitan Park District. The resolution, if it did go on the ballot, would designate the composition of the board, which we assume would be the city council. And in addition, as the mayor pointed out, what this funding scenario doesn't show is that we also have park impact fees as part of our financing packages. This was just to show the comparison between our Greenways levy and what this Metropolitan Park District could generate. But we also, as you know, have a park impact fee, and that would continue. So we would also have that funding to implement projects that are associated with our growth. But park impact fees alone also are not enough to fund our park system or our capital project needs. So 2 recent park districts that were formed, I mentioned the City of Seattle, and under an interlocal agreement, they're providing funding to the Parks District, or to the Parks Department, and the Parks Department is the provider of services to the Park District, and the Park District will have no employees. Any property is still owned by the city. The council is the governing board. They're still going to receive general fund to run the Parks Department. The City of Olympia also approved a Parks District that will also be coexistent with the city boundaries, and the council there will also serve as their governing board, and they have set their rate at 54 cents per thousand. Most of the information about park districts can be found on the MRSC website, and is a nice summary of what the law provides for in the state of Washington with metropolitan park districts, and whether it's set up as just a city or a smaller taxing district like our Chuckanut Community Forest Park District is set up as a separate smaller district. So there's lots of ways to do them. We assume if we did one for the city of Bellingham, it would be the city limits and the council would serve as the board. That really summarizes the information about what they are in relationship to having one just for a city. When we looked at when the FAST report recommended we look at a metropolitan park district, we actually at that time had a conversation with the county, felt that having a county city park district in our area didn't work well because of the different level of services we provide. So we didn't pursue that at that time.
Kelly?
And obviously, the most recent Metropolitan Park District that we're familiar with is the Chuckanut Forest Park District. And it would be my desire that we would honor the contract that we have with the Metropolitan Park District to maintain the vision that was created for that park. But it would be, I think, beneficial to have just one park district citywide, if that's what the council chooses to do. So we would have to figure out, the agreement now is we manage the park district by the contract that we have with them and the agreement we have with them. And when the, I don't remember how much is left to pay off, Leslie,
About $3 million.
So there's $3 million left to pay off that we promised the voters that we'd pay off if that district was developed. And so we would have, and then the district would dissolve because they were kind of the sole purpose was to protect the Chuckanut Forest. And so we would have to talk about preferences of the council about that. I think it would be much less confusing if there was one, we manage it the way it was always supposed to be managed, but we figured out how to deal with the 2 metropolitan park districts and how we're paying for the park. So that is not something that has been decided or discussed or even recommended. So I just thought I'd add that to the conversation.
Okay, well, one of the reasons why this came forward has to do with our level of service discussion. But in Peter Moy's analysis, it was assumed that there would be a Greenways 4 levy and that the MPD, if it began, would be in 2018. Is that still a scenario that we're considering or you're talking about?
Well, if you ask for my opinion, I thought that this would be something that would help us fund our parks, save money from our general fund for our level of service discussion, and then we could talk about if we wanted to do it now instead of a Greenways 4. So we'd either do a Greenways 4 or we'd do a Greenways Forever. And that's how we talk to the public about it. So we'd focus on the funding mechanism of it rather than that this is a whole different, we're going to buy a whole different set of things if we do this, or we're going to double up on something. So I think the council will make that decision about whether we do it now or whether we wait. It would be my preference that we would attempt to work with people that are interested in this to do it now. And when I say now, I mean timed appropriately so we can make sure it passes.
I think there are more than those two options. There's probably some blends in here. Roxanne?
Well, one of the things that I'm interested in seeing, and maybe it's not right now, but certainly for the future, is I would love for the Metropolitan Parks District to have its own sovereign council, or commissioners, rather. What I have seen is that some of the most excellent and diverse leaders have started as parks commissioners, and that just builds such a great pipeline for future leadership. And at the same time, you know, if we want to get different kinds of people to run for these quote-unquote part-time jobs, it would be nice if that could be its own separate entity so we could somehow reduce the stress of the constant demands of this role. So I understand this is a transition time and this is a really big idea, and you know, you want to make a smooth transition. So if the council is not supportive of this idea now of the parks having its own commissioners, I hope that the council would just consider it for the future.
And just to clarify, you can still have a park board that provides advice, similar to our Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. You still have that same kind of committee or Greenway committee or a combination of committee that would review and provide advice to the council. That wouldn't go away. But you could also have a separately elected board.
April?
I have a clarification on the Greenways Levy 4. It still has in general funding 7.6 million will be needed, but my understanding, because we were taking out doing some development and maintenance and operations, that was going to relieve about, was it 2.5 million from the general fund? But I don't see that.
No, we would still anticipate having the same level of general fund support. It would fund the staff positions that are currently funded with the Greenway 3 levy, and also provide much needed capital maintenance that isn't funded generally with general fund dollars. Things like the Fever Creek Bridge, the overpass at Boulevard Park, things that are in bad need of repair is what we were looking at, but not to supplant any of the existing general fund.
So I just want to clarify. So what I'm hearing you say is that on the Greenways 4 current levy, even though they've projected some money to go to development and maintenance, that will not relieve any money from the general fund?
No.
So I have a question. The $12 million total there, I'm questioning whether or not that's kind of realistic. So REIT and impact fees, as you see, are left out of there. Well, this budget year, that's $2 million. And looking forward at some of the large projects we have going forward, well, we cannot draw $2 million from the impact fee fund that replenishes at 1/3 that rate or 1/4 that rate. And similarly, REIT has many other draws on it. So this actually represents a reduced parks program.
This does not include any REIT or park
Right,
impact
so-
fees in the equation.
As the other one doesn't.
But my point is we can't continue to draw on parking back fees to the rate we have drawn on them. The count will go dry soon. So I think 12 million is actually far less than we spend per year. Even adding in the 2 million, that's actually less than we spend per year when you start adding in our capital projects. So I'm thinking the general fund support is actually going to be greater than 4.5 million. It'll be more like 5 or 6 million.
We don't use REIT or park impact fees or typically Greenway levy funds for anything that we fund with general fund. The general fund, the 7.6 million, is mostly for staff. It's for our recreational programs. It's for equipment to take care of our parks. But it's not for capital. Usually that is some additional amount of REIT funding is used for some capital, some materials that are used in park operations for existing, for example, limestone to resurface our trails, or we might have a contract to do some asphalt work. Sometimes that's funded with REIT. It's a small amount that's added to that. That's not part of the 7.6 million general fund budget.
Right, but what I'm saying is that under Greenway's 3 scenario, that development and acquisition number is actually higher because that's where the REIT goes. That's the REIT and the impact fees are going on those capital projects. That's not included here, and what Greenways is, you know, I just think there's more to this picture. I think this underestimates the amount of continued general fund support. I go back to the report by FCS. They assumed Greenway's monies were in there and an MPD to achieve the general fund savings.
But I'm not sure they were considering the MPD at the maximum amount, or possibly.
Said
I mean,
75 cents
if you
in
wanted
2018.
if you wanted to take away all general fund, then you would have to do both. This shows continuing to get general fund support of about $4.5 million.
I actually ran some numbers, and I'm not sure you can get away with general fund support with both. I don't think we're getting away from general fund support regardless. Any other committee members?
Did I address you, Michael?
No. Excuse me?
I want to address what you just said.
Okay, and then I think maybe Terry will have a turn. Go ahead.
Okay. The issue is, if we're doing something forever instead of every so many years, and we're making a commitment every biennial budget based on our pro plan, et cetera, and what the community's asking for, what we're going to be building or investing in or maintaining or, you know, whatever, we have a different time frame. And that's one of the reasons that, for me, I see some savings in general fund for doing this, because we don't have to rush and do it in a certain number of years. We just are every year doing our job. And so I think that's part of it. It's a different framing of the projects that are on the top of our pro plan, coming forward, getting completed, and going on to the next. And we don't have to do them one by one. But so I think that is a consideration, is where we're making a permanent commitment to not having our parks budget go up and down like this. That's my goal for doing this. And then we're having the level of service conversation, so of course saving money out of the general fund to use on many of the things that we all also think are important is one of the goals. So I don't see it exactly the same way you do, but I don't see a lack of commitment to getting our projects done either.
Terry?
Yeah, I'm going to start by saying I think overall this is probably a good idea to look at some time. Yeah, I'm not sure the time is now. I've got a lot of problems, a lot of questions, a lot of concerns yet with this. When the mayor, when you said, you know, we would frame this as just a continuation of a Greenways program and not as a whole different thing, well, I think I got problems, because this is a whole different thing. This is Greenways. You might wrap up Greenways in it, but if we're going to do that, we need to ensure that we have a Greenways board, because right now we have a separate Greenways board that looks at those citizens that bring forward a lot of the issues that bring them to us. We look at them. We have the Greenways board, we have the Parks board, which are separate entities, and for the most part, from the inception, they look at different kinds of issues. This is funding the general operations of the Parks and Recreation system, not the Greenway system. That's a whole different thing that we have to be honest with the taxpayers about what we are doing. We are doing this increase to fund what we've been funding out of the general fund, and I think to do this right, we got to, if you're going to sell it as a Greenways forever, not a Metropolitan's Park District, which is a more honest thing of saying, because that's what we're doing, we need to be able to make sure we got everything out there for the separate board and whatever, because I think that's necessary. Because Greenways, people look at Greenways and they understand what Greenways is they're not going to understand initially what Metropolitan Parks Board, so I think we need more lead time to do this kind of thing. So I've got a couple questions, and I know we're supposed to ask one at a time. So my first one is, you talked about the Chuckanut Parks District, and we would fold this in. Does the Chuckanut Parks District, since they are a separate government entity, that would be their choice? Is that correct? Or they
Absolutely.
would have
What
to
I
agree
just-
to do that, that they
Yes.
would want to be
Yes.
part
And-
of that?
Well, Terry,
Yeah.
I have one exception.
Because those are things we got to look into.
But the reason I raised it is because I knew it would be an
Yeah,
issue, not
right.
because I was saying that we could take the Metropolitan
Yeah.
Park District and
No,
fold
I
it into
just wanted to
this.
clarify it. that-
But I do take exception to the term honest, or what did you say about talking about a Greenways Forever? Because if you ask me, me, as just a citizen, would I like to fund my greenways, now, every few years, or would I like to take a vote and not have to do a greenways campaign often? And I talked to one of the greenways committee members, and they said, boy, if you could get us out from under having to do a greenways over and over and over, that would be great. I think the citizens care that we are providing the park services that they want. And that's, it isn't, and we're trying to keep the system about the same. And the word greenways, using the word greenways, is because it is what they're familiar with. And we're not going to a Metropolitan Park District with a separate board and an independence from the city and anything else like that. So what it does, though, it allows us to go forward. So I guess I'm not trying to be sneaky. If that's anyone's concerns, that I am out there trying to stuff something over on the public, I'm really kind of irritated about that. But yes, your other question is that the Metropolitan Parks Board is an elected body, and they would have to decide that they wanted to participate with us.
Yeah. But this is, no matter what you call it, it's a metropolitan, you're asking the citizens to support a Metropolitan Parks District. No matter, so that's got to be, and we got to educate citizens on that. I got other questions, but if others people,
Yeah, we'll go
I
with
will
Pinky
make sure
next.
I do it correctly.
Leslie, could you tell me how would the Metropolitan Parks District fold in all of the things that the Greenways Committee, because they outlined very nicely a lot of projects and a lot of things that they've taken a lot of time to figure out where we should focus, and I'm wondering how those two things would overlap.
All of the projects that they have recommended, for the most part, are in our city's comprehensive plan. So they are things that our community does want to do. They've been vetted through our community, through meetings, through neighborhood meetings, through surveys that we've done, and picked those items that are priorities for our community. By having continuing to have advisory committee, a greenway committee, or park board, or a combination of the two, they can continue to make recommendations on how we prioritize our capital project funding, which would come forward through the staff to the city council as you budget. But rather than have a specific list that's associated with a 10-year levy that we're going to try and do these things in this 10-year time period, we do have more flexibility because, as you know, we propose projects in our levies that sometimes end up not becoming feasible for one reason or another. The permitting becomes drawn out, and we want to look at doing other things with that money. So this would still, the citizens would still have input through our advisory committee to the council. We would prioritize projects, and certainly all those that are on their list are great projects that are in our comprehensive plan. So we can still implement those.
I'm going to go with Gene, then back to Terry.
I'll be brief. 10 years ago when we did this, there was only two of us up here. It was Terry and I, and it was not easy. We were not going to put Greenways 4 or Greenways 3 on the ballot unless we had unanimous support. So whatever we do up here, folks, we better be unanimous on it, or it's not going to be a good sell to the public. So we've got our work cut out for us of which way we decide here, because it's very important to send a united front to the citizens when we get done with this. So,
Thank you, Terry.
Yeah, one of the problems that I have of doing this right now is we're facing some really big, the citizens are facing, not we are, the citizens are facing some really big ticket items and are being asked, well, in some ways, they're asked to having paid much higher water bills and sewer bills and things, which they have no choice over. And then we're going to be asking them to support a EMS levy, an increased EMS levy. And whether it comes this year or next year, we're going to be asking them to support a big ticket jail item. This is a lot of hit all at one time on our citizens. And I'm already feeling and hearing from people that they're having a hard time with the increased water bills, the increased other stuff that is out there. I think this is probably a good idea, but to try to run this, an increase on it at the same time as we're asking on these other items, I think is really tough. With the regular greenways, that's not an increase. This will actually be a decrease. Much easier to sell to the citizens. My question coming to that is, if we were to just go with the Greenways Committee's recommendations and run a Greenways levy now, could we, in a couple years, then run a Metropolitan Parks District levy that would fold that into that amount?
I'm going to call on Dan and then
Well,
April. Oh, sorry.
I'm asking a question.
I think Alan could talk about it legally. Certainly, what would I say? Anything is possible. But I want to remind us of something that came up at the retreat, which was the cumulative effect of what we're doing. And I would not propose this action as part of our level of service until we've looked at all the other ways that we tax our citizens and how we would want to prioritize those. So Terry, I share your concern about that, and that's been something that is also going to be coming forward to you in a level of service conversation, is what all have we put on our residents. And I also agree with Jean that I think that either we all think it's a good idea or we don't do it. So
But that's my concern right now, and I don't know when we're going to have that total thing, but, that's got to be happening.
well,
Yeah.
you're not voting on doing this
No,
now.
I'm just
Okay.
stating my concerns and objections, not to what I'm hearing right now, because I haven't heard anything else. But
Harry, in
yeah.
answer to your question about could we fold in a Greenway levy, I don't think you would necessarily fold it in. The citizens could pass a Metropolitan Park District, and you could charge some amount. You could still charge up to 75 cents, not that you would want to. And then when the Greenway levy ended, you could increase the levy amount of the Metropolitan Park District. But I don't think you could, they're two separate
Right.
taxing authorities, taxing amounts, so you don't fold one together. You
So
can
could-
balance
yeah.
them.
So then with that, is it okay if I continue just on, it's the same part of the same question?
Little latitude, sure.
Yeah. So if we pass Greenways at 50 cents, and we decided in 2 years or 3 years that now looks like a good time to put this on the ballot, could we put it so that if we ran Greenways 10 years, or say this time, that we would run it at a certain percentage for 7 years, and then it would increase to take in that amount of the Greenways. So we could run it at 25 and increase it to 75 in 7 years.
Well, what you would do for the Metropolitan Park District is
Right.
each year you'd set a levy amount, and you're capped at 75 cents. So for
Okay.
those 7
Oh, I
years, you
see.
could set a lower amount, that takes into consideration that you have a Greenways levy out there also. And then when the Greenways levy expires, you could set the annual levy
Without-
amount.
Okay.
The
At a
levy rate
higher
is
rate.
reset
Okay.
each year.
Okay, that makes sense then.
So I'm going to
Okay.
call on Dan, I think, no, and then April, and then I'll take a turn myself. And we're about at time, so
I just wanted to add in, I'm just very concerned about the fiscal cliff that we are facing, the level of service discussion that we have been having here. So I'm interested in how we can balance things out. This is our charge. This is what we're here to do. That being said, one of the other items that came up during the retreat was the equity question. In addition to the items that Terry's mentioned here this afternoon, we're also facing a housing levy coming up, a re-upping of that at some point. And there are also a committee's been formed, and the school district, Bellingham School District, is strongly considering a transportation levy for this fall as well. So we have other considerations that I think we need to be looking at the full picture and what it is we're asking voters to vote for. EMS jail and some form of greenways coming up this year and next. So I guess my question is, I'm trying to understand the material concern around going to voters every 10 years or 7 years versus doing this long term. One of the concerns that I heard from folks after I kind of talked to constituents about this was that voters would not have the opportunity to say yes again, even though this is yes or no, even though this is a very popular program and it's passed by what I would regard as strong majorities whenever it's been introduced. I'm trying to understand the administration's concerns around doing it every 10 years versus doing it forever.
Well, one of the points I want to make before I answer your question, Dan, is if we just do a Greenways 4, we are adding, separate, we are adding to our level of service problems because we're adding things to build and we're actually not putting as much support into the maintenance and all of that, as you can see on the bottom there. But I think the council, and I'm not an attorney, Alan, maybe the council could why don't you answer that question before I say something that's terrible or inaccurate or whatever?
Well, I think a Metropolitan Park District does remain in place with levy authority until steps are taken to dissolve it. And it's
That's what I was
not
gonna
something automatic, but the state statutes do provide for a process for dissolving a Metropolitan Park District. It's not an easy thing to do.
And one of the things, and I'm going to quote Jack Weiss here. Okay. The truth is, when you look at the support we've given to the parks over time for the things that we believe can wait, like the operation, the maintenance, the capital improvements, that's why it's important to me to have a forever kind of funding or one that we decide to change down the road. Because I said it earlier, I don't believe we should always look to parks to balance our budget. And that's what's been happening. And when I say that, I mean just basically, first of all, taking care of what we have and developing the property we bought. We're also looking at the surplus program. So you are going to have an opportunity to create resources for our capital money in addition to what we're talking about when we look at the property that we've bought over time that now is not part of the parks plan or things we're not going to use for parks. So for me, it's kind of like EMS to me. It's things that are important, and this is very important to the public. We determine how we're going to pay for it so that we can then look at our general fund for things hopefully that will go up and down, like our social safety net, our housing problems, our homelessness, things like that hopefully, if we're doing the right things, are not going to be at the level that they are now. But we'll have that general fund to deal with them.
Can I add a comment? I agree with Kelly. It's very difficult to run your department when you have staff that is funded with a levy that has to be approved every 8 to 10 years, maintenance staff that's taking care of your facilities. and then getting to the end of that levy and not knowing, are you going to be able to keep that staff on and keep your maintenance levels or reduce it? So this is a way, as you can see, instead of having $7.6 million for our maintenance and operations, we would have a total of $8 million. If you look at this scenario, the $3.5 million and the $4.5 million for our staffing and our maintenance and our operations. So right away, we can take the staffing that's currently being funded with the Greenway 3 levy and have that funded outside of a levy. So.
April?
So I want to thank you for bringing this forward so quickly. I know we asked you guys to really do a quick turnover. And I also want to acknowledge that it's one of my favorite quotes, but there can be no change without conflict. And so I think that's kind of what we're feeling right now, and a lot of the people are feeling that. And I talked with several people, and I did a lot of research looking at the impacts of this, even though it's not considered regressive. Whenever, I think that's the term people use whenever you do, is that? I mean, but it's still an increase for those people that are renting, especially. So what I looked at was a lot of people still went with this, even though they had a population that was impacted, and they decided to go ahead and increase the cost because overall it outweighed the negatives. And the reason that is because the way they had their level of service set up is that there was a really clear equitable distribution of funds. And so they could really show all the people that we're going to do everything very equitably across. And so a bit of my my reservation, and it's why I wanted to have that level of service discussion, because currently we do have within so many feet, or sorry, so many, like a mile, half mile, I think it is, quarter mile. Now, that doesn't address the different sizes, there's so much that's left there that really can get lost in equity, that some people could be getting served really, really well with not very many people around, and other people could be getting served not very well with a much higher population around. And to me, our parks plan, which is Pro Plan, hasn't come forward yet, doesn't address those things. So I'm hopeful that if we decided to do this, we'd be having a really strong conversation with our Parks Pro Plan to address these issues and look at level of service. And my concern is, do we have that time? Do we have that time to do this, to make sure that Parks Pro Plan is really dialed in so we don't continue with these? And it's, I want to be very clear, it's not purposeful by anybody. It's just kind of the way things happen and how you get property. And if you haven't had that in your plan, all these different things of equitable spaces, I think it can get lost and it can get really distorted throughout the city. So if we continue forward, I definitely, that would be my perspective, and I'd like to get some information on how we might address that to ensure the equitable distribution and then the current. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't want people to have to come forward and be really pushing to get a park in their area, or to be getting a park that's at least similar to somebody else's. Whenever we're taxing everybody the same, does that make sense? I want to leave that part out of it. I want the equity so deeply embedded into the Parks Pro Plan that we don't have to have these conversations as a board on where the funding's going to go and where we decide it's going to go where it needs to go to fit all the people appropriately. Did I summarize that? So those are my concerns. And then also, I know at this point, neither one of these has come past the Parks Board, and I really value their feedback. So I'm also concerned with the timing in getting these to get through that whole body and then back to us and out. So, but I am willing to continue to have the discussion. So I thank you again for bringing it so quickly.
Question? Well, so I was going to actually call on myself, and then I'm going to ask the rest of the council whether or not we're beyond our time, whether or not we want to continue. So I'd be happy to continue, but I think I need to ask the council that. But before I want to do that, I at least want to finish as a committee member. I also, like Dan, don't quite understand the problem with the renewal. I think of the Metropolitan Parks District as a different creature than a Greenways levy, and I'm concerned about the appropriate matching of mechanism to purpose. that we use general fund continuous steady dollars to run operations and pay for our staff. We use special time-limited levies for capital projects, which are one-time things. You only develop a park once. You only acquire a new trail once. And so it seems very appropriate to have a separate funding mechanism which is more capital-focused and a different funding mechanism which is perpetual and continuous for operations. So I see these as two complementary aspects, and I think that there is a blended solution. And so what I would like to see is a roadmap that includes both Greenways 4 and potential in MPD, because I see these as appropriate to addressing different parts of our needs for our community. That we have, the lists are not a bad thing. We use lists in our sewer plan, our transportation plan, our parks plan, our pedestrian plan, our bicycle plan. We plan in transparent, publicly published lists of prioritized projects. And it doesn't matter if projects don't pan out. We had projects in the Greenways 3 and beyond Greenways that didn't pan out. We shifted money, we adjusted the plan. The Greenways Committee recommended a change in the plan, and we changed the plan. So I don't see a list as blocking our flexibility or as an inappropriate way to plan. I see capital project lists with time-limited levies as just a very natural fit. And as I said before,
Go ahead.
the study by FCS assumed a Greenways plan. So I don't see how MPD only addresses the long-term problem if it's by itself. I think, and I'd like to see, a blended program. What I would want to do is look at a blended program where the second step comes later, if at all, if that's the fork we choose. Because MPD is just one of several options we're considering, whereas Greenways to me is more like the EMS levy. It's continuing an ongoing program that's understood, well-focused, public, supported, and as Terry points out, refocused and slightly smaller. So I see them as quite different, and so I resist the idea that it's one or the other. I don't think that one replaces the other. The Greenways does not pay for our Parks Department, and I don't think the MPD can appropriately replace a capital plan. So that's my reaction at this point. I know that at least two other council members are interested in asking a question. Is it okay with the committee if we can, the council whole, if we continue with this committee?
Can I ask a question? We're already 2 committees behind.
Right, so that's why I'm asking.
You need to ask the president.
Are we?
I think we should move on.
Okay, so that'll conclude the discussion for the Parks Department and Metropolitan Park District for today.